Hollywood was a secretive place in the mid-20th century. Nowadays, the entertainment news complex, the internet, paparazzi, and social media make it tough for celebrities and their handlers to control the narrative. If there's backstage drama on a movie set, the public will likely hear about it virtually as it happens. From the 1920s to the 1960s, studios tightly and fiercely controlled the dissemination of information coming out of its soundstages, dressing rooms, and offices. The news about movie star fights, breakdowns, and health issues became the stuff of rumor, gossip, but old Hollywood was, of course, as scandal-prone as contemporary show business. Many of the most famous, beloved theater-filling stars of Hollywood's golden age found themselves dismissed from major motion pictures for reasons that might anger, upset, or sadden contemporary fans. Here are some bits of showbiz lore that turned out to be true. The actors tragically and shockingly fired from movies. Laurence Olivier wasn't good enough. Laurence Olivier is almost universally regarded as one of the finest actors of the 20th century. Rising up through the UK theatrical world, that country's top stage awards are named after him, and he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his service to the arts. He'd ultimately earn 11 competitive Academy Award nominations, winning for acting in his self-directed take on William Shakespeare's Hamlet in 1948. But all those accolades came well into Olivier's career. In the early 1930s, Olivier entered into screen acting, landing roles in films like Friends and Lovers, The Yellow Ticket, and Queen Christina, a biopic about the 17th-century Swedish monarch. Olivier was new to the movies, and his lack of a reputation preceded him. Queen Christina star Greta Garbo had accepted the casting of Olivier as romantic lead Don Antonio. "What happened was that I started working with Garbo, and I just didn't measure up. I wasn't good enough for her," Olivier later said in a TV interview. But she was an absolute master of her trade, and she was a great figure and had an enormous image of the public. John Gilbert, Garbo's frequent co-star in her silent film era, would wind up portraying Don Antonio. Joan Crawford was so severely teased she fell ill. Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, a 1964 20th Century Fox thriller about a woman driven to insanity by family secrets, was supposed to feature Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. They'd previously co-starred in the similarly campy 1962 horror movie Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Just as their characters in that film were violent rivals, Davis and Crawford felt a similar animosity toward one another. During production of Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, Davis frequently and loudly complained about Crawford to her face and to the crew. For example, Davis criticized Crawford's character work in the middle of a rehearsal with director Bob Aldrich. Crawford stayed in her dressing room as much as possible. She internalized the stress to the point where she became physically ill and stepped away from filming when she checked into Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles. Production continued on Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, as best as it could without one of its stars. Fox stood to lose $50,000 each day. Crawford's hospitalization led to delays, and the film's insurer issued an ultimatum to the movie makers. The former became the solution, with Olivia de Havilland hired at Davis's urging. Crawford learned she'd been fired when Hollywood gossip columnist Dorothy Manners telephoned her in her hospital room and asked how it felt to be fired and replaced. Clara Bow asked to be fired after a horrendous trial. The popular and enduring image of a young, independent American woman in the jazz age of the 1920s, commonly known as a flapper, is thanks in large part to Clara Bow. Known as Hollywood's it girl at the time, the trend-setting actor and sex symbol was a box office pull in the early and silent film industry. Starring in dozens of movies including True to the Navy, Her Wedding Night, Love Among the Millionaires, and Wings, the first winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture. Bow ceded control of her extensive fortune to Daisy DeVoe, her secretary, Bow fired DeVoe, who responded by stealing $20,000, financial paperwork, letters, and jewelry from the actor. That suit didn't happen, but a dramatic trial did. Bow's spending habits came to light during the proceedings, as did excerpts of the very personal letters stolen by DeVoe as they entered into the record as evidence. Bow checked into the Glendale Sanatorium, a mental hospital, in May 1931. At her request, and publicly framed as a mutual decision, Paramount fired Bow from her next film, City Streets. Bow retired from filmmaking and went to live on the Nevada ranch of her husband, actor Rex Bell. George C. Scott showed up late after dozens of roles in mostly individual episodes of television series and anthologies. George C. Scott seemed poised to solidify his substantial jump from small-screen character actor to big-screen leading man in the mid-1960s. After breaking through as unhinged General Buck Turgidson in Stanley Kubrick's multiple Oscar-nominated Cold War satirical comedy Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, Scott was all set to star with Audrey Hepburn in the 1966 heist comedy How to Steal a Million. That movie's director, William Wyler, was among the most esteemed and powerful filmmakers in Hollywood. A three-time Academy Award winner for Best Director, Wyler very much valued punctuality on his projects. The very first day of filming, Scott was an hour late to the set. Wyler told producer Lawrence Terman, according to the latter's memoir, "So you want to be a producer?" I fired him immediately. The studio went crazy. They begged me to reconsider, but I stood firm. Spencer Tracy got drunk and pushy. Fox Film Corporation produced the 1935 horror movie Dante's Inferno, inspired by the 14th-century narrative poem The Divine Comedy. Starring as morally flexible fairground operator Jim Carter, contract player Spencer Tracy, appearing in his 25th film for Fox since 1930. A few years before his back-to-back Academy Award for Best Actor wins for Captains Courageous and Boys Town, Tracy didn't yet have a lot of movie business clout, but he still tried to effect change on the set of Dante's Inferno, insisting that filmmakers rewrite the script to his liking. At one point, Tracy started a physical fight and, in an emotional tirade, reportedly destroyed whatever props were in the immediate vicinity before security guards could subdue him. Fox executives met with Tracy and warned him to behave properly on his next movie. The actor immediately found a bar and, after drinking for 4 hours, returned to the Fox offices and confronted his bosses. They ended his contract immediately. Robert Mitchum got in a fight. In films like Cape Fear, The Night of the Hunter, and Out of the Past, tough guy actor Robert Mitchum often played intimidating and unapproachable figures. He was all set to star in 1955's Blood Alley as an American merchant ship captain who helps Chinese peasants abscond to Hong Kong. Robert Mitchum has been fired after delaying production and refusing to apologize for creating disagreements among the production staff. A press release distributed by Warner Brothers said, at the time, via Robert Mitchum, "Baby, I Don't Care," by Lee Server. Movie reporters descended on the Blood Alley set in San Rafael, California, where one overheard a crew member comment that Mitchum had been under the influence of drugs. Always walking about 6 inches off the ground. He punched a guy, one of the drivers, knocked him into the bay, near killed him. In the wake of the firing and the speculation, Mitchum told his side of the story in a press conference held in his motel room. "It was all a result of my championing of the little guy," Mitchum said, dressed in his underwear and drinking wine from the bottle. "I want them treated right." Mitchum had evidently advocated for some crew workers who weren't being given necessary hygiene products by Warner Brothers, and in his speech, confrontation over that issue had turned violent. Starring in Blood Alley, instead, John Wayne. Clint Eastwood's appearance offended executives for better or for worse. Becoming a movie star, as it is about sheer acting talent or quality of performance. Conventionally attractive actors are often elevated to the A-list by movie studios, filmmakers, and receptive audiences because they possess a hard-to-define star quality, in that they just look like a movie star ought to look. Clint Eastwood, a bankable actor and major movie star from the 1960s onward, got his start as a Hollywood bit player in the 1950s, and his career almost ended before it really took off. In 1959, Universal Studios ended its contractual agreement with Eastwood, fellow aspiring actor Burt Reynolds. He talked too slowly, Reynolds told CNN's Larry King Live in 2000. Judy Garland wasn't healthy enough to act. Judy Garland was MGM's go-to performer for grand movie musicals. A captivating actor and extremely skilled singer, Garland starred in multiple classic song and dance pictures, including The Wizard of Oz in 1939 and Meet Me in St. Louis in 1944. When MGM, Garland's contracted studio for a decade and a half, entered production on the 1948 musical The Pirate, Garland was cast in the lead role of Manuela. During filming, Garland, who had long dealt with drug addiction, fully relapsed, relying on a variety of medications to both sleep and to stay awake. That exacerbated Garland's mental health issues. The actor would neglect to report for work, or would refuse to leave her dressing room if she did. And upon returning to Hollywood, began work on the musical Annie Get Your Gun, Wild West sharpshooter Annie Oakley, in the view of MGM executives. After 1 month of shooting, the studio dismissed Garland and brought in Betty Hutton. The reason? She showed up late to the set too many times, and sometimes intoxicated, appeared to have gained weight, and seemed generally too worn out and unreliable. Ray Milland refused a role. Signed to a 7-year contract in 1934, Ray Milland became a versatile leading actor for Paramount Pictures, almost always starring in movies marketed as lightweight, like comedies, westerns, and adventures. It was something of a surprise to even Milland himself when Paramount cast the actor in The Lost Weekend, a dark and difficult drama about an alcoholic writer who engages in a 4-day binge-drinking session. "I wasn't at all sure I was ready for it," Milland said of the movie before filming began via the Los Angeles Times. He lost weight for the role, got drunk in public for real, and spent the night in a New York hospital section for unhoused alcoholics. Milland was well rewarded for his role with an Academy Award for Best Actor in 1946. He thought he'd transformed his career and graduated to more serious fare, but his bosses at Paramount Pictures didn't necessarily agree. In 1948, the studio ordered him to star in a thriller called Bride of Vengeance. Milland refused to show up on the set, telling Paramount that he thought the role was beneath him and that the resulting film wouldn't be very good. Marilyn Monroe didn't show up too many times. Marilyn Monroe became a legend in the 1950s, with roles as an object of desire in comedies like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and Some Like It Hot. In 1962, she started work on 20th Century Fox's Something's Got to Give. Monroe was coming off of a year-long hiatus and endometriosis surgeries fighting drug addiction, and a hospitalization for depression. On the set of Something's Got to Give, Monroe had trouble recalling her dialogue, and crew members noted that she seemed to be both heavily drugged and deeply despondent. But that's if Monroe was around at all. She called in sick more than she showed up, her absences explained by notes from her doctors. In May 1962, after failing to report to the set for several days over illness, Monroe sang a sexy version of Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy, with whom she'd possibly enjoyed a dalliance, at an event in New York. Something's Got to Give. Director George Cukor, who'd given Monroe the go-ahead to attend weeks earlier, got so angry that he had Fox fire the actor for her frequent absences. The studio then hit her with a $750,000 breach of contract lawsuit, after co-star Dean Martin refused to work with replacement Lee Remick. But before filming resumed, Monroe was found at her home, dead at age 36, from a fatal and likely intentional drug overdose. Loretta Young tried to defy the studio system. It would have been extraordinarily scandalous and potentially career-ending for an unwed A-list Hollywood actor in the 1930s to give birth to a child. According to a BuzzFeed News interview with Loretta Young's daughter-in-law, in 1935, the actress became pregnant via a sexual assault by megastar Clark Gable, her Hall of the Wild co-star. Fox demanded that Young clandestinely abort the pregnancy. As a Roman Catholic and opposed to birth control and abortion, Young refused. So the studio, to which she was a contracted actor, concocted a story in which Young was reportedly convalescing from an unnamed illness in Europe. Young then quietly returned home to Los Angeles and gave birth to a baby girl, whom she then publicly adopted 19 months later. Her career back on track by 1939, with The Ruse a success, Young would once more refuse to do what her studio wanted, and her career suffered. Fox offered her a 5-year contract worth $2 million, and Young declined to sign. Attempting to go around the contract system, Young aimed to sign deals with individual studios. It didn't work. Unwelcome to most every studio in Hollywood, not just Fox, for challenging the way they did business, Young could only secure a role in one movie between 1939 and 1941 for United Artists. Ronald Reagan trashed his studio. In the 1930s and 1940s, Ronald Reagan was a contract player with Warner Brothers, never a major box office draw or a particularly acclaimed actor. Reagan mostly headlined second-rate B-movies like The Voice of the Turtle, Stallion Road, and Santa Fe Trail. By 1950, Reagan had grown tired of unchallenging work, and he said as much to reporter Bob Thomas. He'd been forced to sit out movie-making for most of 1949 after hurting his leg, and he planned on turning over a new leaf in his work. After spending most of the last year in bed, I'm going to concentrate on my career in 1950, Reagan told Thomas at the time, via Go Upstate. And there'll be some changes made. I'm going to pick my own pictures. I have come to the conclusion that I can do as good a job of picking as the studio has done. That interview was quickly published, and it crossed the desk of Jack Warner, head of Warner Brothers, Reagan's employer. Livid that Reagan would criticize his studio's films, he wrote to Reagan's agent, Lew Wasserman, to confirm the veracity of the interview. It was all true, and so later that year, when Reagan's contract came up for renewal, Reagan departed for Universal, at the time seen as a second-tier studio, where he made the comedy Bedtime for Bonzo, starring opposite a chimpanzee. Gene Kelly got angry and hurt himself. Gene Kelly ruled the world of big-budget movie musicals in the 1940s and 1950s. Not only did he star in and hoof his way through the likes of Anchors Aweigh, An American in Paris, and Singin' in the Rain, but he also devised and choreographed those films' elaborate dance numbers. When expert dancing was a major element of big-screen entertainments in the mid-20th century, Kelly's only real rival was Fred Astaire, and in 1947 he lost a role to Hollywood's other big male dancer-actor-singer due to an injury of his own creation. Filming was set to begin on Easter Parade in October 1947, and Kelly intended to spend 2 months preparing and choreographing the movie's dance sequences. On the day that screenwriter Sidney Sheldon turned in the final script to filmmakers, he was informed that Kelly had broken his leg. Kelly told MGM studio executives that he'd hurt himself practicing his dance moves. He'd actually suffered a broken ankle during a volleyball game with friends. With every point his team ceded to the opposition, eventually kicking a nearby doorframe so hard that he busted a bone. Kelly asked MGM to get rid of him and to bring him in Astaire. Lita Gray got pregnant with the director's baby, an icon of silent cinema. Charlie Chaplin wrote and directed many of his movies, including the 1925 adventure comedy The Gold Rush. He also starred as the Lone Prospector, a riff on his popular downtrodden tramp character. Chaplin handed the only significant female role in The Gold Rush to Lita Gray, real name Lilita McMurray, who at that time had appeared in just 2 films, The Idol Class and The Kid. They were both Chaplin movies, and Gray had been around 12 years old when they were produced. She was 15 when Chaplin signed her to a contract, placed her in The Gold Rush, and began a relationship with her. 6 months after filming began, Gray became pregnant with Chaplin's child. To avoid statutory rape charges, Chaplin married Gray in a secret ceremony in Mexico. Chaplin's publicity agent, Jim Tully, told reporters that Gray had quit not only The Gold Rush, but acting altogether, desiring to spend her days doting on her new husband. The world wasn't yet aware that Gray was pregnant, or had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. Because she'd show the physical effects as filming continued, Chaplin had actually fired his teenage wife from The Gold Rush, and then replaced her in the movie with actor Georgia Hale.